The first book I have read was a novel about Hungarian heroes defeating the ugly Habsburg troops at the early 18th century, and that made me actually a historian. But what makes me happy after more than 30 years in this profession is how much more I know about history, how much more I learned about history than just this heroic story. And I could understand throughout this journey what makes history more than just a fact. I also thought for a very long time that historians are lonely wolves, working alone and happy to be the owners of their own discoveries alone. It took a while for me to understand how much better it is to talk to people, to the extent that today it is much harder for me to go back to write a book than to just continue talking over a lunch with wonderful colleagues. And places like the WICO are actually those places where it's the easiest to learn these things. What I'm doing here at the WICO is, simply speaking, I'm trying to follow the money after the First World War. Simply trying to answer the question, how could it happen that businessmen whose fate seemed to be sealed at the end of the war, because their property was in enemy states, those states declared their foreigners unwanted on their territory, very easily could salvage what they had, and even managed to get into very profitable partnerships with their peers there, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia, in Yugoslavia. It's a fascinating story, and obviously it's full with wonderful, sometimes quite ridiculous things, like, for example, one of the textile companies keeping records all of their bribes within their accounts as a kind of allegedly small loans given to the state security in the city, the police, or even the mayor. But it tells more about economics, also imperialism, and Austro-Hungary than just these very funny anecdotal pieces of history. It's something that I see as a phenomenon that could fundamentally change how we understand the relationship between economic imperialism or informal imperialism and the politics of imperialism. It's usually perceived that politics precedes economics, political power is used to have economic power in imperial or colonial context. And what I see, why actually these imperialists could prosper after their empire disappeared, it's quite the contrary. Somehow imperialism here worked because these businessmen had local contacts, fostered local partnerships, and built actually trust, some kind of moral mutual obligation system. And it's also important for me, going back to the first sentence, because it is one way of overcoming this kind of narrow history I mentioned, fascinated me so much when I came to this field. In Hungary, it's quite typical to think about this period as a kind of tragedy, trauma, victimhood, somehow a common suffering of everyone. And what I see in this story, but also I saw in other previous stories I dealt with, is quite different. It's a story of human resilience, the ability of peoples to somehow circumvent those norms that are imposed on them by political power, to create a kind of normality that, even if not the same as it was before, somehow makes them still human for a very long time. So that's what I'm trying to discover or think about here at WICO.